My name is Nick Peddle from Automation Hero, and then on the marketing team, the director of demand gen. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. Three of the Automation Hero staff, heroes as we call them. Cynthia Almonte, Cindy, is the director of product management at Automation Hero. Kevin Shepard, director of product solutions, and David, I'm not going to try to pronounce your last name because I will offend you if I do it, how wrong I will be, is on the sales team. He's going to help facilitate the discussion with Cindy and Kevin today. And with that, I will now turn it over to David, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to join us. And thank you to Cindy, Kevin, and David. Take it away, David.
Thanks, Nick. Much appreciated. By the way, it is Danishevsky, so just so everybody knows. But again, thanks, Nick, and looking forward to our conversation today. First up, let's kick this off to Kevin. So, Kevin, I was thinking, companies right now, they like to invest in technologies like IDP, intelligent document processing, to solve problems. What are some questions that we should be asking ourselves to determine if a problem is big enough for IDP?
Yeah, cheers, David. So I think it's a really common kind of question. Obviously, enterprise software isn't cheap, so people need to make sure that it makes a lot of sense and they get the return on that. So I think the main thing is obviously looking at instead of the cost of the software, what is the size of the pain that they're dealing with? So, is it a 10K problem, a 100K problem, $1 million problem? And then actually, around that problem size, it's good to understand and to try and break that down. So, what are the other benefits that it gives? Does it give back hours to, teams of people? Does it allow for easier growth and build across? Could it generate more revenue? We've got a good few customers generating more revenue by kind of bringing in processes and things, or will it have a downstream impact? So when actually calculating your pain level, kind of take these things into account. Can actually the impact be much bigger than just that, FTE saving as such, or time saving there? I think that's quite important to kind of consider and think about. Following up from that, David, typically the next thing is obviously why. So, why do it now, or why do it later? But when we think about the compelling events, what sort of compelling events and things have you come across?
Thanks, Kev. Right now, what I'm hearing on almost a daily basis, it's economic factors, it's macroeconomic factors. We all know what's going on economically, the nation and the globe, and a lot of these organizations, especially enterprise organizations, are looking for ways to streamline their processes, create efficiencies, and that's really what a huge focus is right now. Besides the elephant in the room of the economy, mergers and acquisitions, that's also key. I mean, you have a lot of subsidiaries that are being gobbled up by the enterprise, by these large enterprises that are all running on different platforms, and being able to streamline a lot of these processes with different platforms is key. And time and efficiency is money. Besides that, growth, a lot of these companies with expected growth are trying to figure out a way to grow exponentially without having to sacrifice too much in the back end. Hiring issues, that's always key right now. Is I hear all the time, it's hard to find good people. It's hard to find good people. So we're not looking to replace people, but we're looking for ways to really, again, streamline and make things more efficient. And this does actually create more jobs as well. People need to run some of these platforms on the back end. We also have compliance and legislation, another big key. And then a big one that a lot of people don't really think about too much is the customer experience, being able to automate some common customer requests so that the turnaround time is exponentially quicker is key, because we're in that age where we need everything now. We want everything right now, and that's how automation can really assist that. Yeah, and one more kicking over back to you, Kevin. So you've decided which is your first process that you want to automate. Maybe there's multiple processes that you want to automate. How far in the future should you look when considering additional use cases, additional uses, and additional processes?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's always good to kind of look as far ahead as you can. Try and look at your landscape, find out what wider opportunities there are. Obviously, you may have these one or two kind of pivotal that you've got board sign off on, or their main objectives for the business to help streamline. But understanding what future use cases there might be is really important, because then you can line yourself up with a platform that can do more of the end-to-end process. So rather than just a single point solution, you can actually look for something much wider that you can use to cover multiple use cases. And then maybe actually as part of your journey, you go off and you do some use case discovery and you find actually another 50 use cases, but a couple of them might be really simple. So they might not pay for the platform in themselves, but they could be implemented very quickly, get quick return on your initial investment. But making sure that platform can obviously cover those is, quite key. So all your integration points and, other kind of end-to-end processes is always worth a look at.
I'm so glad you said that. One of my favorite parts of speaking to potential clients, prospects, is the discovery. As we articulate what it is we do and what we can do, I love those aha moments that I see when I'm speaking to prospects, that they just realize, oh my goodness, I can't believe that this exists, and how can I automate this right here and now? And it's those light bulb moments that I see all the time with just asking questions to people, and they have these moments. And we think of new use cases on a daily basis. It feels like there's an infinite amount, and I think that use cases are obviously only going to grow over time. So no, I definitely echo that sentiment. Cindy, I'm not forgetting about you. Okay. Once a company understands their processes to automate, how do you match your problems with the right solution? How do you match your process? How do you match those problems with the right vendors?
Yeah, I think there are a number of processes, and let's split this question. Kevin, I'll answer the business side of this and then I'll throw it back over to you so you can answer the technical considerations, and we can kind of split this up a little bit. I think there are several things that need to occur. When a problem has been identified, when a workflow has been identified within an organization as a likely candidate for automation, you don't sit down immediately after that and start authoring your automation. There's a number of considerations that need to occur. The process is actually fairly important at setting up a path internally so that you're successful into deployment. Ultimately, what we want to do is push automations to production. We deal with customers all the time who have had problems that they've attempted to solve and could never get to production. Our focus is always on how are we going to be able to move this process forward so we start tackling the core problem. And that means typically pushing the automation so it actually has an impact on the processes internally within the organization. We will talk to customers in our process across a number of different areas, a number of different angles. We set expectations around what the system can do. Automation, AI, it's not magic. It has corners that can be explained to a customer. You want to do this, this is a limitation, and you need to understand that limitation. Here's how we can work around the limitation. So setting expectations across people in your organization that are realistic, the time frame to deploy, the amount of work that it's going to take to continue to support. It's also, automation is not magic. It is a platform running processes, which means it's going to need maintenance. It is going to need someone who understands security settings to maintain and manage on an ongoing basis connections to APIs and security tokens. So setting up the right infrastructure to support your automations on an ongoing basis is really, really critical. And setting expectations internally. I never want to tell someone, yes, absolutely, this will be done and out and in production in 3 weeks, unless you are rock solid that that is something which is achievable, because things happen. You start to gather your manager comes and tells you, here's the use case, automate this invoice process. And it seems simple and obvious, but once you start exploring that workflow, you can uncover information you didn't know, people on other teams who are touching the process or who are downstream from that workflow who you need to consider, security issues you didn't know about, IT issues that you didn't know about. It's really important to make sure that you have a very granular understanding of all of the potential considerations and touch points, all of, in effect, the people who could potentially have impact on that project, and gather requirements as broadly as you can, but then narrowly define. Here's what we're going to be accomplishing. Here's how we're going to approach it. Here's who needs to be involved. And here's who's going to sign off on the success or failure of this automation project. One of the things that we run into most commonly when dealing with customers and trying to get them to self-serve their automations in our platform is scope creep. And I think anyone who's ever worked on a project understands, yeah, sometimes you kick it off, you get into development, and someone says, oh, wait a minute, there's this other thing that I didn't realize, and now we need to consider that. Scope creep is one of the most difficult aspects of trying to get something out of test and into production. You need to very, very concretely define, here's the scope of what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to do anything more than that. We will loop back in further iteration, but we have a clear definition of what is the scope of this project. And we push back. We understand that sometimes you hit an insurmountable obstacle with regard to scope creep, but we push back as much as possible to make sure that the scope of the workflow, the scope of the automation is something that is well understood by everyone. Here is what we are delivering. What that does from a business perspective is it means when you get to the end of the process, you haven't disappointed all of your internal constituents. You have delivered what you have promised, and then you can iterate to build further. There's also an enormous amount of confusion among customers in general around throwing AI at a problem. People don't understand the differences in models, what is needed to manage and maintain. There is kind of a magical black box that a lot of people think around AI, and we help customers understand, here's what this can do, here's what it can't do. And those negatives, here's the scope of what I'm doing, here are all the things that we could look at in the future, but I'm not doing those right now. Again, it all comes into a clear setting of expectations and as much avoidance as possible around the scope creeping, and you're never being able. The number one thing that we run into with customers who have attempted this on their own and never been able to get to production is scope creep. Kevin, from a technical side, what do customers need to think about?
Yeah, I think it's, everything you've raised there is spot on. I think, and the really important thing is to remember the technical side. So quite often we're working with business teams, and it doesn't matter how magical the AI, unicorn box is that we're putting in there, when actually they haven't actually talked to their IT team. They haven't understood the different integration points with the existing tech that they've got. Are they replacing any tech, or do they need internal technical resource to actually help, whether it's just for opening up security or whether it's to actually help. Maybe they've got a center of excellence internally already that can be utilized to help build the platform. So working in collaboration with the IT team, however that may sit within that business, I think is critical. There's then other initiatives. So often IT have other initiatives running, like cloud migrations or approaches to migrate CRMs across, or something else that is outside of maybe the scope of this project but could impact this project. And I think that's always worth consideration as well, because some of those things have knock-on effects as you go. I think, again, I mean, when looking at the solution, what you're really after is that platform, the platform that can be your end to end and not just, you know, a band-aid as such, not just, you know, doing a little bit of patchwork, but helping to go across the picture. So again, from the technical side, looking at, well, okay, if we put in this automation, does it actually mean we can even retire product X? You know, does it mean that there's other, again, going back to our benefits point earlier, you know, are these things kind of there that can build up? But certainly I would say the main thing for me, even saying it's technical, but thinking more just openly, is that collaboration between the business and the technical, and making sure that these things are considered. Otherwise, you get, you know, 2 months into your project and all of a sudden you hit a roadblock. So it definitely needs thinking right up front as you go forward.
You know, I'm so glad that both of you brought up magic when it comes to AI, because I feel like with ChatGPT coming on the scene, most common people kind of look at it as magic. You know, you can essentially make it do almost anything that you can think of. Now, granted, there's limitations, but to common people, ChatGPT really is magic. And the you know, the honest point is, it does take a lot of work on the back end to make what we see happen from something like ChatGPT become magic. And so with the customization that we can do, with the platforms that we can integrate with, it is like magic. And with intelligent document processing, or I like to call intelligent document understanding, these aha moments that I spoke to before, it feels like a lot of people I talk to think that this is in a way magic, but in essence, it's just a very, very sophisticated solution that is getting better on a daily basis. So I'm so glad you both hit on that. Moving on, kind of on the same path though, to both of you, what are some questions that organizations should be asking themselves when evaluating these vendors? What specific questions can they ask?
Cindy,
Kevin, do you want to go first on that? Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
go. I'll go first.
Ladies first.
I like to understand the potential impact of the problem. Are we solving a problem for a line of business and it has limited impact and is probably kind of a smaller issue for a group of people, or is this organization wide? Obviously, when you're introducing automation into an organization, finding the largest ROI problem is always the grail. We always want to solve a big problem and save a lot of money that can be potentially repurposed someplace else, or turn teams of individuals who are doing manual work that requires no thought into doing more work that is better set for a human being that requires real thought. So finding the right problem initially. Some organizations like to start with a smaller problem, or a particular team who has budget who wants to try to solve a particular problem. But finding something which has a good ROI calculation, whether it's a small problem in a line of business or a big problem enterprise-wide, is always a really good initial approach, because then once you've impressed with automation's ability to solve these bigger problems and shown the ROI based calculation of what you've saved, it is much easier internally to get buy-in to solve other problems.
Yeah, and I would, again, in line with that, you know, as well as the small and big problem, is it a short or long term solution? So is it just something that, you know, is short term because of business strategy change? Kind of think about that, you know, actually, is it a really good time to revisit the whole process that you're building? And again, if so, is the vendor the type of vendor that can do that with you? You know, can they help you take it back to the whiteboard and say, okay, just because you've been doing it like this for 20 years doesn't mean that's the right way. How can we adjust? How can we utilize the new technology that we now have actually to the best of its ability, rather than just replacing what you've got from that side? I think that it's always an ideal opportunity to take that step back, but not always, you know, people do with that. And I think as part of that really big consideration is internal resourcing that you can put to the project. So, you know, what from your business team, from your IT team, you know, who are the people that can really help drive it forward, who can really help understand, you know, how reimagining some of that process can really have the biggest impact. And again, get them speaking to the vendors, get them building up that relationship early on, and make sure that you know, that's there, and they can, you know, really, I don't know, have their input and have their understanding and really collaborate with the vendor.
You know, and oh, Cindy, go ahead.
Yeah, I was also going to say, in addition to identifying the resources, I think it's also really important to understand what the capability of those resources internally are going to be. There are some times when it's just better to engage with services to get a process launched and running within an organization, and then have your team support it on an ongoing basis, but not actually author it, not actually build it. Every organization is different. Some organizations have deep technical resources and can throw people at the problems and help us collaborate well with us. Some organizations aren't capable of that. And I think it's really useful for an organization to just do that assessment up front. The JavaScript coder who runs your ops team might be a good person to run the automation on an ongoing basis and consult in the development, but it might be a lot faster to engage with services with the platform that you're bringing on board and have them do the primary development of the core automation and just get you bootstrapped to it that much faster.
And completely aligned there. And to echo on what Kevin was saying about, you know, some internal processes have a current way or a right way. With so many vendors out there, there are now multiple ways to get from A to B, from the input to the output. But I will say, when you're asking these questions, what you're looking for is the best way. So that's something that absolutely needs to be considered when you're asking a lot of these questions. Your current way is probably not great, which is why you're interviewing vendors. So a lot of these questions are definitely key to find the best way, the most efficient way, and to grab that coveted ROI. A few more questions to consider. You know, what is the current automation landscape? So a lot of these prospects that I speak to, vendors alike, they do have automation already in-house, but again, some of these technologies can be dated, or they're just not doing what the user necessarily is looking for. And again, it's not the most efficient way to get from A to B. Another is, can this be an opportunity for platform consolidation? This is another key question that we need to consider. Also, who's needed in the decision-making process? Again, you know, these are types of questions that you absolutely should be asking. And one last one that I definitely like to throw out there: security. Do we need to consider security? Most oftentimes, absolutely. This is absolutely something that both sides need to consider, and definitely should not be left unsaid.
Yeah, so something else that just came to mind, David, as well, with you, the points you raised, is also partnerships. So, you know, does the vendor already work with, you know, a partner base and things? If you're looking at multiple automations, multiple long-term strategies, and you don't have an in-house team that can manage that, then it's quite likely that having a partner on board in the ecosystem will help you really push that project forward and things in there. So certainly, you know, have that kind of thought process. And it may be that you've got, you know, a really good partner that you work with already in-house that can come on board into it, or it might be that you're open to bringing on board a experienced partner from the vendor. But I think that's something else to consider as you go forward into your implementation and things as well.
And that's the perfect segue to my next question, Kev. Let's shift gears to implementation. So we've selected a platform. What's your best advice around getting it up and running as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I think some of the key points, a couple of bits that Cynthia touched on earlier, is, you know, making sure that you understand the requirements that you need to, and also who it affects. as part of the process. So if it's affecting a team of business people, if it's affecting a team of IT people and things, make sure they're involved, make sure that they understand that you're not just trying to rip and replace their jobs, that you're going forward and you're building it, because you're going to want their input and things as part of the process to really get the requirements, the integration points, all of these things together so that the implementation is smooth. If nothing else, you're going to want them for UAT testing as you go forward. So them having at least some eyes on the project, I think, is definitely good early, as early on as you can. And they're less likely, as I say, to feel scared about it if you've had them involved early, which is also something I've seen work really well. From the actual, implementation side, spinning up cloud environments and things takes minutes. We're not in the world that we were 20 years ago, where it was like a 7-day install of just the software package itself. It can literally be 5 minutes later, you can be on your system. However, your point around security is a really prime one. We have often had, and this is nothing new to be fair, often had customers kind of, get environments up and running really quick and then say, actually, we need to tick all these security check boxes with our security chief or our CISO or whoever it might be as part of that process. So it could be something really simple like email integration, but because it's touching a cloud platform, all of a sudden you've got lots of hoops to jump through. So ideally you want to start those sort of questions, those points, as early as, before you've even signed the paperwork, kind of, get them running, get them going in the background. It's quite often that they don't hold up that process, so if a vendor's cutting you a nice deal for the end of the month, then it's not like you need to miss out, but you can certainly get that that thought process in place, get those questions answered. Any vendor out there will be more than happy to run over security concerns and things. Make sure that the NDAs are signed at the right level, or if there's master agreements, because it's a group business and that helps you expand later. Again, you can get those conversations going really early in the process.
Absolutely.
And then as I say, the other main thing is the success criteria. Make sure that you understand that from day one. So just as we were saying about scope creep earlier, success criteria creep, I think, is another thing that does tend to come up, where you've kind of worked out, okay, if I shave time off here, or if I kind of manage to process these things 2 days faster or whatever, then it helps and that gets the ROI. And then all of a sudden someone else looks at it and says, no, that needs to be twice as much, or whatever it might be. That can really derail a project and the implementation on there. So again, both your requirements and your success criteria, getting them understood really early and getting everyone in alignment with them, I think is pretty key.
I could not agree more there. It's something that comes up often, but it's something that can be tackled, like you said, early to mitigate some of those headaches later on. Cindy, I got a really good one for you. That's a two-parter though. So let's talk about, how do you measure success of implementation? What are the metrics that you recommend someone look at?
Yeah. So I think that there are a number of different ways to look at definitions of success and metrics associated with that. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we need these systems to be provable. We need these systems to show their value. No customer just wants a system that's sitting there that they're paying for. Everyone wants validation. And I think that the metrics potentially also evolve over time. Your definition of success as you launch a project into production might be specifically around outcomes, but your insight into the impact may evolve as the automation trickles through your organization, through your team. So let's take a call center example where we automate a workflow process associated with a call center. Initially, the ROI-based metrics that we might be looking at might be all around productivity. They might be, how many minutes have we saved per call? How many minutes have we delivered overall in aggregate across the team. We can slice it a number of different ways and kind of look at that. We can then relate productivity back to, and we've saved you X because we've given you back this amount of time. So it could be definitions of time related back to the value of that time for individuals. It could be just sheer, we need to process these records during peak periods faster. Let's think of an accounting team that needs to close books on a quarterly basis and needs to run automations associated with supply chain and contract reconciliation at the end of a quarter. It can entirely just be processing records as fast as possible. Because of the volume, an increasing volume of records. So it can be the speed of that processing, which is the most important. We can make recommendations in any direction. We can tell a customer, here's the most effective and efficient way on an ongoing basis to tune your system and the metrics you should be looking at associated with this automation. Or we can say, okay, during peak periods, our recommendation is you throw X additional resources at the problem to get it out within the time frame. If you have 72 hours to close your books at the end of every quarter and it needs to run even if it's over a weekend, well, during those periods, maybe you add resources to your environment cluster and you get everything processed every time at the close of every quarter on schedule. And that is your metric. It's really going to depend a little bit. The key metrics that you're looking at will depend based on what your workflow is. But ultimately, the more you can foot your metrics in something which is calculable back to dollars, gets more buy-in internally, will solve people's problems internally. And then over time, you could potentially look at, okay, I've now expanded the use cases on my platform. I'm not running one, I'm running 10. Have we optimized scheduling so I don't have to add resources during peak periods? And I'm addressing that all through optimization. So there's, I think, an initial thought process about the first use cases or the first couple of use cases, which should be footed in productivity and ROI-based metrics. And then over time, you can look at things that are more optimization based.
Absolutely makes sense. And that's definitely what I try to preach early on is, let's focus on a project or two and let's see how it works. Mm-hmm. And then once that ROI is really starting to take shape, once the efficiencies are starting to take shape, then we have a plethora of opportunities to explore other use cases within the business, and that's when it gets really, really exciting. I know we're doing okay on time, so let's do another question. This is definitely a hot topic. We've all heard the stories of companies investing in a platform, right? And let's say they're buying a 3-year license, and maybe it never got up and running, and maybe it's not very effective. In your opinion, how can this be mitigated? How can this be avoided? And let's say I let Cindy go first. Yeah. Last time, let's give it kick to Kevin.
Yeah, cheers. So I think, as mentioned before, early on, understand the requirements, the success criteria, and understand, what you're actually trying to achieve as part of, the implementation. Getting the business team and things and the technical team on board with you with those early on will then hopefully mean that everyone has the momentum in mind and can really push things forward. We often see blockers, integration point X, and then, 3 weeks later, we still don't have connectivity to their email or something just because Fred in IT isn't available, and things like that. If you can line those things up early, or at least understand what those tasks are, then you've got a lot less chance of hitting that as an issue at the point where you really need it as you go through that implementation. I think as part of that, try and break down your project, try and understand what those individual steps are. Can even parts of the project be split into phases? Can you actually start implementing something and put it live while you're still working on other parts? So, that iterative approach of implementing the solution, might mean, you know, even that first part of just getting your email connectivity up, pulling that email in, showing it through, maybe that instantly gives some ROI. It might not be the full ROI, but maybe it gives some, and you could really start to kick that in, you know, early on potentially, as part of it. And then, as I say, iterate on the more and more complex side as you go forward.
I think for these large scale enterprise projects, the most unsung hero on successful teams is the project manager. Ultimately, someone who can manage all aspects of a project. These enterprise projects span across teams. They require different types and different kinds of approvals at different touch points. A project manager, not just somebody from accounting who runs a spreadsheet with all of the tasks on it, but someone who can literally say, this is the definition of phase one based on the requirements from the business, and then manage the entire team's work effort to that. That person is worth their weight in gold internally in terms of being able to really move these projects forward. We run into so many companies who don't think that they need to, for instance, write down requirements and get consensus across their organization as to whether everyone agrees as to what the scope of a project is. Doesn't know that that team should be meeting on a regular basis so that everyone understands the status of the project and can accelerate or include additional information that the entire team needs to know. We as an engineering team, we meet on a daily basis so that everyone knows what's going on. A project moves forward based on understanding of where you are. It's very important to move the project at the same time you do the coding, and that you identify your documents, and breaking the problem down into its parts seems like it's simple, but the project manager on these projects, just incredibly great role. And if someone is not experienced as a project manager, work seems sometimes like it is simple to get done. It seems like, oh, okay, everyone will just know how to move things forward. It's incredible. Some of these projects are incredibly complicated across organizations. Having someone who is aggressively managing the project is just hugely critical at moving these things into production.
Yeah, definitely. That collaboration also between your internal and external resource, you know, so from the customer side, I think, and a lot of vendors, you know, as we go back to the picking vendor kind of topic, have project managers, they have customer success managers and things, but you need one on the customer side as well. You know, you can't just have the one. It needs to be both sides. They need to manage, and then customers themselves, you'll find, have half a dozen other external third parties that are involved in, as you say, these enterprise scale projects. So totally agree, Cynthia, that's essential.
I want to echo the project manager piece from the rooftops. Honestly, a project manager that's calculated, efficient, that has a process to check boxes as they go, one that's organized, that's worth their weight in gold or Bitcoin, whatever you want to call the currency that you want to use right now. It really is essential in moving the process along, and I'm so glad that you both touched on that. Appreciate it. I know we're kind of at time, so I'm going to kick it back to my man Nick, and thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Cindy. Would like to open it up for questions now. Because I have the floor, because I have the microphone, I am going to ask the first question, and then while we let our attendees, our guests, come up with theirs as well. So the first I want to ask is, what do you say to someone who's dead set on 100% automation, automating a process 100% with 100% accuracy? Because I think that's a hiccup that I know I've heard about, that people get hung up there with saying we need 100% accuracy with the automation. I don't know if Kevin or Cindy, if one of you wants to take that.
I think Kevin and I both have strong opinions with regard to that, but as with many things, if anyone promises you a pot of gold, you should probably look very deeply at what they're offering and what they're promising, because there's Kevin, what do you think about the 100% promise?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've come across, many times over the last 20 years, to be honest. It's nothing new. You obviously, everyone as a vendor wants to say ours is, the best, it can do this, it can do that. The reality is 100% on any process is just, unlikely to happen. I must admit I've had one or two in the last 20 years that I've managed to get to 100%, but they are very, very rare, in all honesty. So instead of looking at it that way, start looking at, again, like your efficiency gains. Like, what is, if you're looking at it in a, I need to save X number of hours of people, then rather than saying I need straight through processing of 100% of this many documents, well, if you got 80% accuracy across, the same, actually, what does that mean? All of a sudden, have you made your AP clerks, 6-7 times more efficient than they were the day before? Because you'll probably find that still gives you that, hour saving at the end of the day. So focus more on the efficiency, the control, all of those aspects, rather than the golden 100% as it is.
If
Agreed.
anyone
Great.
guarantees you 100% and says we guarantee it, ask what they are guaranteeing. What are you guaranteeing? What is going to be 100%, and what is the guarantee behind it? Because I completely believe that as you start to probe, you'll start to uncover, okay, well, what we're talking about is this aspect will function. Push on that. It tends to be a marketing claim that we're seeing quite a lot, that in actuality doesn't really mean much to the business processes that a customer is trying to automate.
And as a sales director, it's something that I hear all the time. Can you achieve 100%? Can you get this at 100% accuracy? And what I try to drive more is, let's talk about how to quantify the difference of getting to 80%, then 85%, then 90%, and then each percentage point after that. Let's quantify what that means to you, and let's get to the highest possible accuracy we can. But 100%, as to both your points, you better start digging into what's really going on there. So just something to think about.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for that, for the thoughtful. Maybe we could get a soapbox out for our to look for that pot of gold. Mixing analogies there a little bit, but
I think it's leprechaun. I think it'll be leprechaun gold if you do find it. It's not going to be gold at the end of the day. So,
well, good. Thank you for sharing. We've actually seen this question before, and it's a good one. So, Kevin, I'll send this to you. Does Automation Hero offer on-premise solutions?
Yeah, it's a good question. And typically the answer is no, and we're cloud hosted from that side. We've actually found quite a shift over the past few years from even, government organizations and things that were absolutely 100% on premise, now being really open to the cloud. They've generally deployed a lot of their environments up to AWS, Azure, GCP and things. And actually we work with those. We can build those in to work with their security, to have, cloud to cloud kind of VPNs, to, have the private security network there. We deploy to specific regions to cope with obviously PII data. So, for GDPR, for HIPAA, for other kind of things there. We know certain regions and things have very tight control on that side. So we've actually found that the need for on-premise just isn't there as what it used to be. So focusing on the cloud side also means, from our side, obviously, we control the infrastructure to make sure the performance is as good as and things, and the customers don't have to worry about that. So they don't actually have anything to deploy locally, essentially. That really helps with the implementation cycle as well. It's just a whole big piece of the puzzle that they don't have to think about. As I say, new environments can be spun up in minutes and things, as opposed to having to get their DevOps team and their security team and their everything else all running in tandem to get new servers built, to have that deployment side. You take all of that out of the equation from there. And obviously from the ongoing support side, as well. Having the cloud hosted solution again takes away the pain from their internal support side.
I find many customers, when they ask that question about on-prem, are actually meaning a different question. What they're actually asking is, can you connect to my on-prem data sources? Can you live within that ecosystem? And that's something that we've been quite successful with. Everything from customized or internal SQL databases to AS400 machines that have been running legacy processes for decades in some cases. We have a very robust connectivity strategy and architecture that means that we can connect to on-prem, hybrid. The only thing that we have difficulty with, quite logically, is completely disconnected systems where they're not internet supported, where there's no way to get into them. And even those, there are potentially workarounds. They're not attractive and they are expensive, but we can work around those problems as well. But anyone thinking about, oh, I need this on-prem, should think, do I really need this on-prem? Is it really just that my data sits in a particular location and I need the application to access those pieces of data?
Great. Yeah, thank you both for that. So we have time for one more question. This looks like a question for Cindy. So I'm just going to read out loud here. We have an RPA solution that we've been trying to process documents with, and it's really, we haven't gotten it working the way we want to. So if we add an IDP solution, how does an IDP solution like Automation Heroes work with our existing RPA solution that we use for other processes?
Sure. So I like to just make it very succinct. We play extremely well with existing RPA solutions. You can plug us in as a downstream application running data that, say, a desktop bot has captured, and we can process that kind of data. We can also be used as a replacement for those processes, but that, generally speaking, is a much more complicated process internally. No one wants to, if you can just add a piece of technology to solve a problem and include the intelligence that you're getting through our AI to your documents, that could solve your problem, and you might not need to rip and replace your automation infrastructure, your traditional RPA. We've dealt with customers who've had RPA stacks, local desktop bots, and have been running them quite successfully to do their simple RPA-related tasks, but they need the AI component. We can be plugged into that kind of stack. Now, that's obviously, it's an additional expense. Some organizations want to have a longer term strategy of, we'll plug you in to solve the problem, and then we'll initiate a second project, which is you're replacing that RPA stack. I think every organization is individual, and we need to consider kind of what are the best options. Generally speaking, rip and replace internally is always a harder conversation to have. And companies want some proof. The proof can be, we've put them into our RPA stack, they're executing and have saved us against these metrics this much, or and we can see an increase in productivity if we simply replace the existing stack with a new stack. Kevin, any thoughts on that? That's a little bit of a technical thing too. So
yeah, I think you touched on some good points. I think typically we have worked alongside many of those tools in RPA, BPM, other kind of business tools that they've got, and simply complemented them. I think, as Cynthia said, the longer term is that maybe there's parts that those tools are doing that we can do as well. And then you look to say, okay, where I had RPA pulling the email through and sending the PDF to, Automation Hero for the IDP side, maybe Automation Hero can just look at our mailbox, and do that part of the process. So sometimes it's a transition. But what that also means is that actually then you free back up your RPA licenses that they can then use on other internal short-term strategic things, sort of on that side. So again, it might actually be a nice cost-saving perspective around your RPA licensing and things, just to free up some of that resource. And most of our customers, I would say, the ones that have RPA and things, typically if you're working with those teams, so that center of excellence or business process automation team, they're really open to other tools. It's not like they're completely wed to their RPA tool. So they're really happy to look at how they can complement each other and say, okay, I'm not going to lose any sleep over the fact that I built a bot to do X and now you can do it. They don't mind that, because as I say, it helps free up resource in that side, or makes, you know, the actual ongoing support more streamlined. So yeah, I would even go as far as saying, Nick, probably 80-90% of our customer base have RPA. It's just, you know, most people have it now, right? So it's just it's really common that we come across that.
Yeah, thank you. And that's actually a great point you make, Kevin, about freeing up an RPA license. Even in a rip and replace scenario, you're not just letting money that you're investing in bot licenses to go dormant and just, you know, these bots to go, you know, to eat that. You're not eating that cost by letting the bots go dead. You can reallocate them and use them somewhere else and get even more efficiency and compound that efficiency. So that's a really good point you made. So thank you. Look, we're at time here. I really appreciate everybody joining, taking the time to be with us today. You can follow up with any of us at Automation Hero for more questions. You know, our contact information is on our website, automationhero.ai. Thank you to Cindy, Kevin, David, for taking the time to share your expertise today. Again, I really hope this was a valuable discussion for everybody. I know I learned a lot. I really enjoy learning a lot from these folks. I always learn something every time I hear them speak. But again, thank you sincerely to those who joined us today, and to our Automation Hero team here for being part of the panel. So with that, we'll wrap up today's webinar. But the recording will be available. The link will go out to the recording. Will go out by email, and we'll see you at the next one. And have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.